Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera. Hi, Maricella. How's it going?
It's going.
Yes.
I wish I had better things to say.
No, I think we're all feeling something similar, a little bit numb, a little bit just tired is something I've heard a lot, just physically tired, emotionally tired. It's been a rough week and, and a few months before that. So, I feel what you're saying.
Yeah, it's been a rough year. I mean, let's be honest. I think the last few months there's no denying that it's been rough. You know, there's so much going on in the US and I always talk also about El Salvador, and they're also facing lots of stuff with tropical storms and flooding, and there are things happening everywhere, so much so that it does get overwhelming. So it's going. But
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
what
off,
we can
but
do.
I wanted to hear, what I've been hearing so much. Ellevate's been doing weekly roundtables with senior leaders, D&I professionals, entrepreneurs, really bringing small groups of our community together to support each other. And a big theme that comes up is this concept of self-care, and it's something, now more than ever, given what's happening in our world and how we're each, processing and dealing with that in different ways. And it's a physical process too. I would love to know if there's anything that's, been working for you in terms of self-care.
Ooh, this is rough. I mean, I can bare my soul as I usually do in this podcast, and I've been struggling. I've been having a pretty hard time the last, I would say, month and a half or 2 months, and trying to figure out a balance of how to get myself in order, because I really do believe that we need to be taking care of ourselves first if we want to be effective and efficient for other people and for our community and for our work. For me, realistically, it's been having a good support system. My friends, my family, and people at work who have nudged me in the right direction of taking care of myself and reminding me that I need to really take ownership of being okay has helped. Just having people to talk to and to turn to. Not even for advice, because sometimes you don't need advice. You just need someone to remind you that they care or remind you that they need you. So that's been good. I've been exercising. If anything, maybe this pandemic and other frustrating situations will get me in shape, because I have been boxing and doing yoga and trying to channel my energy into physical activity. It's good for endorphins. It's good to clear my mind. And one thing that I don't think is necessarily self-care, and maybe I don't know what you think. I would really like to hear your thoughts on this, but I've been reflecting on it primarily this last week, is that I was having a really hard time and not doing okay. And this week, with protests and with everything happening, and with us as Ellevate responding and putting our voice out there to how we can support the Black women in our community and the Black community in general, it's made me get out of my own head, and it's made me reminded myself that it's important work that we do, and that there are so many things I can be a part of. So yesterday I went to a protest, and it's the being able to be part of this conversation of standing up for others and of being able to use my privilege to do something about it. It felt this sense of connection and belonging and hope that I hadn't felt in a while. And so not traditional self-care, but I guess something we need as humans still. That
No,
was a lot.
it's not, and I agree with all of that. And I think part of it is taking action and feeling like you're helping others, just as people have helped you during this time, right? I mean, as you said, we're humans and we're a community. And we talk so much about how in communities there's the give and the get, right? There's times when you need support and there's times when others need your support. And so it's kind of the full circle of that experience of knowing that you can stand up for other people and you can use your voice for others. And I think that that's very important, and it's so important that we talk about that. And I wanted to highlight what you talked about, which is the Ellevate team supporting you as well, which I'm really happy to hear. And certainly as a leader, that's something we should all strive to do, is create a culture of belonging, to create a culture and a community within our organizations. But we've been talking so much through Ellevate, through our social channels, and through the work we're doing around how we support others in the workplace, specifically Black women. We need to do more to support our peers, to provide that type of advice, to provide that type of just guidance and camaraderie, to use our voices for others and to lift all up for equal access to power. So for anyone who's listening, who wants to learn more, who wants to do more, I encourage you to check out Ellevate Network, our social channels, or the website. We're putting out resources and doing whatever we can to talk about the ways each of us can do more, can take action, especially during this time and into the future.
Yeah, it's important. It's important that it doesn't end now, right? Like what you just said, into the future. I think that needs to be highlighted. This can't be something that we forget in a few days or in a few weeks. It takes time. It's a marathon, and we're here for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it's so true. I want to introduce our guest today, Sarah McBride. She's the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Commission. She's also running for Delaware State Senate. And I was really excited about this conversation. Not only does she have an incredibly important story to tell, we talk so much about taking action, how we work for organizations that align with our values, how we support organizations that are doing the right thing, and how we take action such as running for office, where we can really try to change a lot of what's wrong in our world and what's driving much of the inequalities and lack of access to opportunity, racism. They're so systemic in our society, and there's so much work to be done. And I'm just was honored to talk to her and hear about the path she's taken and the way she's using her voice for others. So I hope you all enjoy my conversation with Sarah.
Can't wait.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. I'm very excited to have you here and to have this important conversation, which I know we'll be sharing with our audience. To give it a little bit of background for our listeners to understand, your story and how you got to where you are today and the important work that you're doing, I'd really appreciate it if you could share a bit of that with us.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's wonderful to be here in conversation with you. And I appreciate you using your platform to help lift up the voices of others. My name's Sarah McBride. I'm currently the National Press Secretary at the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. And I'm a transgender woman. It took me 21 years to muster up the courage to say those last two words. And today, being a transgender woman is one of my proudest identities. It's helped shape me into the person that I am. It's made me a more compassionate person, a stronger person. It's led me into an amazing community of bravery and authenticity. But I wasn't always so proud. As a young person struggling with my gender identity and still in the closet, I feared that there wasn't a place for me in my community. I worried about my dreams and my identity being mutually exclusive, and I feared that the heart of this country was simply not big enough to love someone like me. And so I kept my gender identity buried deep inside for my first 21 years. I told myself that if I could make it worthwhile for other people, by me staying in the closet, by making a difference in this world, by making my family proud, that those things would somehow bring me the wholeness and completeness that I lacked. But it was really not until my sophomore year of college, after being elected president of the student body at American University and having the chance to work on all the issues that I cared deeply about, from opportunity for students with varying economic backgrounds to the fight for disability rights and gender equity to, yes, the fight for LGBTQ rights. It really wasn't until that experience that I finally gained the courage and the confidence to finally come out as transgender to myself, to my family, to my friends, and to my communities, both at American University and also back here in Delaware, where I grew up. And when I came out, I was really scared about the reaction that I would get. But what was so incredible was that from the first moment my coming out note posted, which I posted on Facebook, and then it was republished on a blog here in Delaware and in the student newspaper on my campus. From the first moment that my note posted, every message that came in was a message of love and support, and more than anything else, celebration in the diversity of our humanity, celebration in the fact that I was able to live authentically, and celebration in the fact that others in our community were celebrating this milestone and this news. But what was also very clear to me was that, as difficult as it was for me to come out, that process, and even more clearly the response to my news, demonstrated how lucky I was. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't be a privilege to be able to keep your job or stay in school after you come out. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to keep your family after you come out. And it certainly shouldn't be a privilege to be able to be safe from violence after you come out. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that I helped transform some of the privileges that I had, not into a privilege for the few, but a right that's guaranteed to everyone, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity, and frankly, no matter their background or identity. So I began working in advocacy. I worked here in Delaware to pass a non-discrimination bill protecting transgender people from discrimination in employment and housing, public spaces. I worked nationally, first at the Center for American Progress and now the Human Rights Campaign. And I also fell in love with a wonderful man named Andrew Cray, who was a transgender man. He was an attorney and an advocate for accessible healthcare for everyone. And about a year into our relationship, Andy was diagnosed with cancer. I was his caregiver through it all. And unfortunately, after a really heroic battle with cancer over a year and a half, Andy finally passed away from what started as oral cancer and eventually spread to his lungs. And he passed away just 4 days after we were able to get married at the age of 28. And I think for me, what that moment really illustrated was that time is of the essence, that there is as Dr. King said, fierce urgency of now in this fight. And that every single time we ask people to sit back and allow for a slow conversation to take place before we ensure people opportunity and respect, we are asking people to watch their one life pass by without the kindness and the fairness that everyone deserves. And that is too much to ask of anyone. And so that experience lit a fire under me. I continued my advocacy. I continued my work, not just in LGBTQ equality, but equal rights and human rights writ large. And I am now actually running for state senate in my home state of Delaware, in the district that I was born and raised in, to ensure that everyone in this community is able to get through hard times, to make ends meet, and to thrive. I see the same way that when I came out, so many of my neighbors aren't as lucky to have benefited from the goodness and the kindness of so many people in this community. And I want to make sure that the values that we have here in Delaware of being a state of neighbors, that we more fully live up to it and that they're truly available and felt by everyone. And so I'm running for state Senate back here in Delaware this election, and I'm proud to do it. And I'm proud to do it in the honor of my husband, Andy.
Sarah, I just want to take a moment for myself and for our listeners to really appreciate you and your story and the work that you're doing. I heard so many words that really stood out to me. Words like privilege, action, advocacy, politics, violence, and that's this groundswell of this moment that we're in, which is, acknowledging the privilege we have, using that to take action for others, to end the senseless violence, to take action as citizens, as elected officials, to use our platform collectively to do better, to do more. And I want to say, first and foremost, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Can we talk a little bit, and, to contextualize this for our community? There have been so many inconceivable, groundless killings the past, for all of time, but specifically the past couple of weeks. One specifically, a Black transgender man, Tony McDade, which was, a senseless act of violence. And I want to talk to you about that, about violence directed against the transgender community, about what we can do to speak up, to take action, to change this, because it does need to change.
One of the things that, first off, thank you for that question. I think it's so important. And I know so many of us are rightly outraged by the death of George Floyd, by the epidemic of police brutality that plagues so many of our Black neighbors. One of the things that's so important, I think, for the LGBTQ community to remember as we commemorate Pride is that Pride and the broader LGBTQ movement was launched in response to police violence at the Stonewall Inn and the ensuing uprising and riots that took place in late June of 1969. And so the LGBTQ community in many ways is a movement and a community that was born in the fires of those riots, in the aftermath of that uprising. And that legacy and the ongoing racism and police violence that we see against our Black neighbors, including LGBTQ Black people, requires us and calls on all of us to not just speak out, but to demand action and to demand change. Recently, one of the most recent known victims of police violence, as you mentioned, was Tony McDade, and he was a transgender man. And I think his death provides an important symbol for those of us who are working for a more just world, to remember that, as Audre Lorde says, there's no such thing as a single issue cause because no one lives single issue lives. Tony was both trans and Black, and he was both trans and Black in the same moment that he was experiencing police violence. We can't separate these issues. We can't prioritize the cause of the most privileged, because if we do, we leave so many in our own community behind, those who live at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. There's an ongoing epidemic of police violence, and there's an ongoing epidemic of violence against transgender people, particularly Black transgender people. And Tony is an important reminder of the fact that those epidemics meet. They meet too often, and they require us to make action across issues, because Tony or others like him won't find justice and safety until we do. And so, we need to make sure that we continue to push forward the reforms that people are calling for through the protests that we've been seeing, from everything from body cameras on police officers to full and true accountability when police violence occurs, to steps that prevent this violence from occurring in the first place. We need to make sure on the LGBTQ front that we have clear non-discrimination protections, because in a majority of states, LGBTQ people still do not have clear protections from discrimination throughout daily life, including in their interactions with law enforcement. So there's so many issues that we need to address to make sure that everyone in our community, everyone in our physical community, and everyone in our identity communities, that everyone feels truly safe to walk down the street as the person that they are.
You recently announced your bid for Delaware State Senate, and that is one way through political activism, through engagement, through voting, that we can really fight harder and do more around making these policies a reality. Could you share a little bit more about that story? What was it that led you to running for office, and what are some of the key things that you're fighting for in this time?
So I decided to run for state senate because I saw, working on LGBTQ advocacy, that all of the issues that matter to us, they're really handled disproportionately at the state level. From healthcare to education to the environment to criminal justice reform, it's really in the states that we can make the most amount of progress. One of the things I saw growing up was that politics is the place where you can make the most amount of change for the most number of people, in the most number of ways possible. And I think at this moment, we need to make sure that we're restoring our community's sense of hope and optimism and belief in the possibilities for progress that are before us, particularly with everything that's going on at the federal level. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring because I've seen firsthand in my work, in my life, in my advocacy, that quote that I mentioned from Audre Lorde, that there's no such thing as a single issue cause because no one lives single issue lives. And in order to make progress on healthcare, on education, on economic opportunity, on safe communities and criminal justice reform, and on, yes, LGBTQ equality, we need more people with a sense of courage and compassion to throw their hats in the ring, to get involved and to run for office. And so when the state Senate seat that I grew up in and live in opened up, when the incumbent retired, I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And so I've been running for almost a year now. I'm running with the full support of our retiring incumbent, Harris McDowell, who was a progressive lion of the Senate. I'm running with the support of state representatives throughout the district, and I'm running with the support of community members from across the 1st Senate District. Obviously, the pandemic has required us to change our strategies a little bit more, to meet voters in a different way. But we're continuing to move forward, and we're continuing to get a very positive response from neighbors across this district, which stretches from parts of Wilmington up to the Pennsylvania state line. And I look forward to hopefully being elected in November and having the opportunity to fight as hard as I've fought on the issues I've worked on over the last decade, to fight as hard for the residents of the 1st Senate District, and to hopefully make progress on issues like affordable health care, safe and quality public schools, paid family and medical leave, a livable wage, and all of the issues that really are impacting so many of my neighbors across this district every single day.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for taking action and for leading in this way. I'm incredibly inspired, and I know that our community is as well. A final question for you is really more of a message to our listeners, to anyone who, maybe navigating their own identity during this time, or supporting and being an ally to someone who is. Do you have any thoughts or advice for them?
I think the most important thing for people who strive to be allies is to know that allyship is not proclaimed, it's bestowed. It's not an identity, it's an action. Those of us who strive to be allies, we're going to get it wrong. We're going to make mistakes. And what's so important is to enter that allyship with a big heart, with a willingness to listen, and an understanding that you will inevitably have to grow. And that when feedback comes your way, to take that in stride, to listen, and to incorporate it into your actions, to not become defensive, but to understand that everyone makes mistakes. Everyone's on a journey. But what makes a true ally is someone who's willing to listen, to grow, and to evolve. All of us need to do that all the time. I think hopefully right now our society is doing that. When it comes to the question of police or the issue of police violence and of racial justice, we will be a much better place. We will be a much better country if all of us open our hearts a little bit to one another, listen to one another, and grow with one another.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us on the Ellevate podcast today. It was a true honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be on.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.